The Bengals have released Andy Dalton, which is bittersweet for me because I always liked Andy. We became friends over the past few years, him playing with the Bengals and me being a diehard fan like I am. And it's funny because as in every team, the quarterback gets the majority of the blame and gets the glory when the team wins. But Andy, I felt unjustly got way too much of the blame when he had no offensive line. His number one receiver was out. I mean, I remember, I'll give you a few Andy Dalton stories, brief ones. When they played the Colts in the playoffs, people forget A.J. Green was out, the starting tailback was out, the starting tight end was out. I mean, he was playing with the JV. Rex Burkhead was the go-to. And they drove right down the field the first series, and they scored against the Colts. And I remember there was little hope, and I went, wait a minute. We did all gadget plays, and Rex Burkhead was the focal point of the offense. That was literally, and I'm not even a coach, I said, that's one series that they came up with. And sure enough, the rest of the game, I think they scored 10 points, maybe. I'm talking total. They scored a touchdown, 7. I think they scored 3 points the rest of the game. I could be wrong. But, that 2015 season the Bengals had, if Andy doesn't get hurt against the Steelers, on my kid's life, that team could have played with anybody because they brought in A.J. McCarron. And people forget, the Bengals went to Denver, who ended up being the Super Bowl champs that year, and was playing with them, with our backup quarterback in Denver. And I was just like, man, if we don't lose Andy, we had that team. That was a good squad. The 2005 team and the 2015 Bengals teams were the two teams in the last 30 years that could have played with anybody at any point. But as they release Andy, I think the city realizes how much he was as far as like his charity work, never a problem in the locker room, never a problem off the field, nothing. Was one of those quarterbacks, he was in love with the game and not the fame. That's a slogan I've heard this year since the draft. Are you in love with the fame or are you in love with the game? Andy's in love with the game. But this is a cool story I just read on Twitter right before I got on here. Was last year the Bengals were playing the Raiders, week 11, I believe. And Alden Tate, a wide receiver on the Bengals, got hurt during the game to the point where he had to go to the hospital. And on the team flight back, Alden's still in his hospital scrubs. And how I guess a lot of the teams, they charter planes. Bengals don't have their own plane, but they charter a plane. They charter a Delta flight. And the big money players and the coaches sit in first. And then the rest of the team, along with media and trainers and stuff, they sit in coach. Now, nobody's going to get a middle seat. It's all window or aisle. So you're still going to have room. Well, Alden, being a new guy on the team and not a high-priced guy, he's assigned a coach seat in the back. And Andy, knowing Alden Tate was in pain, went back, told Alden, you sit in first, and I'll sit in the back and coach for this flight so we can be comfortable. Because, it's a cross-country flight. And that's a story I've never heard up until right before I came on the podcast. Literally, it's the last thing I read on Twitter before I started recording. And I think that is a testament to the kind of team player and kind of person Andy is he gave up his first-class seat to somebody that, second-year guy, I think second-year guy on the team, Alden Tate, and let him sit in first. That's huge, I think, as a teammate. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to miss Andy, and I hope the future is great for him. And I think when in 10 years from now, I think the city's really going to appreciate all he did while he was here in Cincinnati. But I got huge news on a side note. So if you listen to last week's podcast, I had TJ Hushmanzada on, and TJ has some great stories. And within that, we started talking about my frustration with the front office. Lo and behold, the day the podcast airs, so the timeline was kind of iffy to me. It was weird. The day the podcast posted last week, the same day my manager calls me, and my manager doesn't know football at all. So she calls me and she goes, Gary, do you know of a Zac Taylor? And I went, well, I know one Zac Taylor, which is the coach of the Bengals. And she goes, I got an email. And she goes, I just forwarded it to you. Could you look at it? He's trying to get in touch with you. And So I checked the email, and it looks legit. It looks like a legit NFL head coach. It's cut and dry. Hello, I'm trying to reach Gary Owen. I'm Zac Taylor, head coach of Cincinnati Bengals. I'd like to get in touch with him. And so my manager, being the protective manager she is, she reaches out to Zac Taylor and FaceTimes him and said, I just want to make sure it's you. She had to Google him and look up his picture because she didn't know what he looked like. So she FaceTimes Coach Taylor, and it's him. Then she gives him my cell. He shoots me a text. I call him. This is how small this world is, and this is how one show can lead to another show or a relationship. Back in 2015, I roasted the Miami Dolphins in training camp. And Zac Taylor was the quarterback's coach for the Dolphins that year. I had no idea who the assistant coaches was on the Dolphins. And so I go in, roast the team, it goes great. Zac gets on the phone with me. We start talking. He goes, yeah. He goes, man, I was in Miami back in 2015 when you came and roasted the team. He goes, so when he got the head coaching job in Cincinnati, he was like, yo, we had the team get roasted in training camp when I was in Miami. It went over great. We got to do that here. So I guess last year, his first year, he brought in a comedian, and he said, it just didn't go well. He goes, and I'm hyping it up going, no, I've done this in Miami. It works. And the comedian just didn't get it. And this is what you got to know about roasted NFL teams. And I've done quite a few. I've done the Steelers, the Texans, the Ravens, I did the Bengals. I used to do USC. I mean, it ain't no jokes. You just got to go in on these dudes. And so he brought in a comedian. It didn't go well. He goes, I blew it, man. He goes, and then I find out you're a diehard Bengals fan. I put two and two together, and he was like, that was the guy that roasted the Dolphins. So he said he's been following me and everything else, but still I was like, well, how did he find out about me? Because he kept saying, I found out you're a diehard Bengals fan. Here's where the stars align. So you got the head coach of the Bengals. I'm talking to Hushmanzada last week on the podcast about my frustration with the Bengals. You guys didn't see this during the podcast. During the podcast last week, every so often, TJ kept hitting his phone. He kept declining calls. Well, I called TJ to try to put two and two together because it just seemed like it was too coincidental that I had TJ on the podcast and I get a call from Zac Taylor. What happened was Duke Tobin and Zac Taylor were calling TJ to ask him, TJ trains a bunch of wide receivers, incoming draft picks, potential draft picks. They were calling to ask him about some of the guys he trains. And TJ said, man, I wasn't ignoring your call. He goes, I just didn't recognize the phone number. And I was doing a podcast with Gary Owen. That's crazy. You guys are calling me. And they was like, who? And he was like, Gary Owen, man. He's like the biggest Bengal fan out there. And I guess after that, TJ was hyping me up. I guess Zac looked me up and realized, put two and two together, that's the guy that was roasting the Dolphins. So I get on the phone with Zac. We talked for about 20, 30 minutes just about life. And then lo and behold, he says, yo, I just want to make sure you need anything. You want to come down to a practice, or I want to make sure your presence is felt with the team, and you want to come to a game. Here's my cell. Hit me up. And I was like, oh, my God. Oh, I forgot there was a coronavirus. I forgot we was on lockdown. My family will tell you I was in the best mood for about 48 hours. You couldn't tell me nothing.